So hi everyone, my name is Jennifer. Welcome to today's webinar. I will be doing a webinar on the suspensions module. So just a quick overview, the suspensions module will allow you to better manage your debtors. By making use of the suspensions module, you will be able to determine a specific suspension settings for your customers by either making use of global settings, customer group settings, or even determine the specific suspension settings for your individual customers. So in your accounts workflow, you will be able to view a list of all overdue customers as well as any notes that have been made with regards to payment plans. Before the customer is suspended, you as the ISP will need to approve the suspension for the customer. The customer will then receive their first notification, second notification, and eventually be suspended. This is, of course, all dependent on how your suspension settings are set up. So after your second notification has gone out, the customer account will automatically be suspended, and from there you will also have the option to pause the customer suspension should they quickly want to make payment and send you the proof of payment. Please note that when the customer is suspended, it does not stop the customer's billing. Okay. So when it comes to your resellers or your master accounts, you also have the option to only suspend your reseller or to suspend a specific customer of the reseller, or there is a bulk suspend option which will suspend the reseller and all its sub-accounts. Okay, so in this webinar, I'm quickly going to go through the following with you: the suspension module setup, your notification setups for the suspension module, the suspension workflow, and I will quickly show you how to manually unsuspend or suspend your customers. If you're not making use of the new suspensions module, which I will be showing you today, then you will also still be able to manually or suspend and unsuspend customers on the old way. So let's quickly start with our setup. To get to the suspension module setup, you will need to go to billing setup, and then click on the billing setup option. So if we scroll down, you will see your customer account suspension settings here, and you will need to ensure that this section is enabled. First, you have your suspension mode. Please note there's only one suspension mode, which is X number of days after invoice due date. Okay. So you can just leave this section. This mode just means that suspensions will only be possible once the invoice has been marked as overdue. So in the next section, you will need to determine how many days after the invoice has been generated does it become overdue. So if you put in 7 days, this means 7 days after the invoice has been generated, the status will change to overdue. Okay. Then you have your days till warning. Okay. So after you've approved the customer suspension, they will receive their first notification. Then in this section, days till second warning, you will need to determine how many days after the first notification must the second notification go out. So if you put in 5 days, this means that another 5 days and then the second notification will go out. And then you have your days till suspension. So how many days after your second notification has gone out does your customer actually need to be suspended? These days all count with each other. So if you have, for example, 7 days in here and another 5 days in there and another 1, this means 13 days after the customer account has been after the invoice has been generated, 13 days later the customer account will be suspended unless they've paid in the meantime. Next, you have your temporary unsuspension in hours. Okay, so this refers to your suspension pause section in your workflow. Here you will need to add the amount of hours that you would like to be able to pause the customer suspension for. So this will only be used for customers which are already suspended, but they're quickly phoning in saying, "Hi there, I just want to make the payment, can you quickly switch my internet back on?" Okay, and please note this is the amount of hours. So if you want to unsuspend or pause their suspension for a day, you will need to put in 24. Okay, and then you have your warning emails and SMSs. So here you can see your first warning email and SMS, second warning email and SMS, and actual suspension email and SMS. You can read through this and you can make any changes if you want to, but I don't think it is needed. If you want to add an SMS, you can type your message here. If you do not want the customer to receive an SMS, you can just leave the section for the SMS fields blank. After making any changes here, remember to click on the update button. Okay. So, let me quickly show you about the notifications. You will be able to determine at which time the SMSs need to go out if you are making use of these SMSs. To do this, you will need to go to Setup and click on the Notification option. You scroll down to your notification settings. Here you will be able to see account suspension notifications. You will need to turn this on, and then you will be able to determine from which time until which time the SMSs should go out. This is just to ensure that your customers do not get SMSs at 1 in the morning telling them their accounts have been suspended. Then here you also have the option to determine whether your resellers should receive suspension notifications for their sub-accounts. Okay, so the reseller will not be spammed with multiple emails. They will only receive one email listing all of their customers that will be suspended. If you are making use of this reseller suspension notification settings, you will still need to activate this on the specific reseller profile. So this will not be automatically on for all your resellers. This is just to ensure that you don't start spamming your resellers with notifications. So, as previously mentioned, your customer suspension settings are set up in 3 places. Your global settings, which is under your billing setup. So these are your global settings, and they will automatically be applied to all of your customers. So you can also set these settings for your customer groups. So to do that, you will go to Customers and then click on Customer Group. Once on your customer groups, you can click on the Edit button. You can go to the Suspension tab, and here you'll be able to set the customer group suspension settings. Firstly, you can determine whether the suspension settings should be enabled or disabled. If it is disabled, customers in this group will never be suspended unless otherwise set on the specific customer profile. If suspension is enabled, then you will be able to determine whether you want to use your default system settings as done in your system setup, your suspension module setup, or you can switch this button to no, and then you will be able to determine the specific suspension settings for this customer group. Once again, you have your days till overdue, days till second notification, and your days till actual suspension. Then, lastly, you will also be able to determine the suspension settings for a specific customer. So to do this, you will go to your customer profile. On your customer profile, once it is loaded, we will be able to see a section for suspension details. So you can edit the suspension details. You can determine, do you want this customer to use the customer group settings? Yes or no. If no, you can once again determine, should suspension be disabled or enabled for this customer, and what this customer specific suspension settings should be. On this screen, you will also be able to add a suspension arrangement note. So your suspension arrangement note is just for you to add a little note about this customer will be paying his outstanding amount in 3 months or 4 months, etc. After you've made any changes, remember to click on the Save Changes button. Okay. So next I will show you your accounts workflow, where you will be managing most of your suspensions from. So to find that, you will go to workflow and then click on accounts workflow. Here we can see our cancellations, which we did last week, and as well as your suspension settings or your suspension workflow. Here we can see there's overdue, first notification, second notification, a list of all your customers whose suspensions are currently paused, as well as a list of all your suspended customers. If we go to the overdue section, here we can see a list of all overdue customers. You've got your accounting code, your customer name, total billing, monthly billing, how much this customer is overdue, the amount of days that the customer is overdue, as well as what the customer status is. So here we can see this specific customer is cancelled. You can always click on this little edit button on the right hand side, and then you will be able to see your suspension arrangement note if there is one. Always remember to check this and ensure that someone else has not been working with this customer and that there's not a specific arrangement in place before you start suspending customers. So to approve a suspension, you're going to click on this little red button here, and you will see this pop-up screen. So all you need to do from here is click on the Queue for Suspension button. So according to either your global suspension settings, your customer group suspension settings, or the specific suspension settings which were set on that customer profile, that will determine when the customer gets a second notification and when they will be actually suspended. Once a customer has been queued, they will move to first notification. Once they receive their second notification, they will move to the second notification, and once they're suspended, they will move to their suspended notifications. From here, if you click on this little pause button, you'll be able to pause the customer suspension. So here it will tell you the customer account suspension will be paused for 5 hours or 24 hours or whatever you put into your suspension module setup. To pause the suspension, click on the Enable button. And here we will now see that the customer has moved to the pause section. So this will enable the customer to quickly make their payment and send you the proof of payment. An important thing to take note of is the disable suspension option and the reset. Oh, sorry, it's paused. And the reset suspension option. These are not the same thing. Disable suspension means you are going to disable all suspension settings for this customer, and this customer will never ever be suspended. Reset means that you're just resetting the suspension process and the customer will go back to overdue. Once the customer is, or if the customer is still overdue, you will once again have to approve the suspension and it will go through the workflow again. So to reset a customer suspension, you can always just click on the reset button there, or to continue the suspension, you can click on the resume suspension button. If you reset the suspension, you will see this pop-up screen and you can click on reset suspension. So now we will see our customer should be back here. Okay, which it is currently not because obviously the customer has paid in the meantime. The suspension module does have an automatic unsuspension function, but please take note the following factors that might affect the unsuspension time. So if your customer pays from a different bank than to yours, it will normally take more or less 2 days for the payment to come into your account. So now that's 2 days after the customer has made payment and is still suspended. Then you need to allocate your payment in your Sage 1 if you are making use of that, which means by the time that's day 3 when the payment actually shows up and you import your banking, and then only at day 4 your customer will be unsuspended because the midnight cron needs to run and the payment needs to sync to Datatal. So I would advise, if the customer sends you proof of payment, that you rather reset the suspension with that little green button. Let's see this one. That you rather reset the suspension instead of waiting for the automatic unsuspension to take place. In the case that you have resellers who are not paying their accounts, here at the top is a filter, so you can filter for your reseller list or your master accounts, and this will give you an account or a list of all the sub accounts linked to that specific reseller or master account. So this customer has been marked as a reseller, so if we click on the approve button here, you will see there's two options: bulk queue for suspension or queue for suspension. If you queue for suspension, this means that only the reseller or the master account will be suspended. If you click on the bulk queue for suspension button, this means that the reseller and all of their clients will be suspended. Always be careful when doing this, as we don't want to make our resellers angry, but the option is there if you need it. Just like the normal reset functions for your normal customers, you will be able to click on the reset button and it will do a bulk reset for your suspension. So this was our webinar on the suspensions module. If you want to use this module, you are more than welcome to. Please make contact with us so we can enable it for you and you can do the setup. If you do not want to use this module, you will still be able to suspend and unsuspend customers in the old way via the customer profile. The new module will just ensure that you are able to manage your data a bit better, as well as suspending their accounts. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask your questions on the right hand side of your YouTube video, and I will answer them, or if there's something you want me to show again.